Hi.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay.
I thought you had started already.
It's Ellen and Tembela's fault.
Says the man who went to Wednesday's meeting.
He's just very progressive.
Way ahead of us, Isobel. Shall we do a 5 past start? We'll just take another 2 minutes because I think maybe 1 or 2 more people might come in. And then we'll start with the round of introductions that Thabo will manage for us.
Sounds good.
What's the protocol for for moments like this where there's this pregnant silence? Do we play jazz music? Do we carry on making small talk? Do we ask how people are doing? Do we toi, sing a freedom song?
Clearly you are making small talk, Ashley.
I don't cope with silence. I'm a very noisy person.
Not good for interrogation or cross-examination.
Well, then I can just say to Isobel that I'm very happy that you will be participating in 2 webinars in Sweden within the next few weeks. One is recorded, I believe, and one will be online. And the instructions are being worked on, so you will get them. The one for the seminar on the 24th, you will get the instructions later this week. So.
I can't believe that I accepted the seminar on the 24th because I've since realized it's a public holiday here in South Africa. But I'm delighted to be participating, so I think I will give myself the 25th off.
Great.
That's the problem with sort of global Outlook calendars, is that they don't remind you of these really important facts.
Okay, so
All right.
shall we get started?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 5th Learning Hub. Today we're going to be focusing on the basic income grant as a conversation starter for discussing how do we connect community-based campaigning or community-based activism more directly to policy-related work on national and global campaigning. And I am going to hand over to Thabo to take us through a round of introductions, after which Tembela will introduce herself and introduce Isobel, and then we'll move straight into the presentation that will form the basis of today's conversation. So over to you, Thabo. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Morning, everyone. My name is Thabo, and I work with Ubumbano, and I support with admin and logistics. So as part of our introductions, there's a bit of feedback. Maybe if I can ask, if you're not speaking, please mute. Otherwise, I'll have to mute you from my side. Yeah, so as part of our introductions, I think it will be good to introduce yourself, where you're from, and one interesting thing about yourself. So I'll go down the list, and lucky number 1 would be Brendan.
Hi guys, my name is Brandon. Having a bit of connection problem here. I'm from the South Durban Basin Community Development Trust from Durban, Wentworth, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Brendan. If I can ask, is it Danita? I think she might have just joined. Danita, yes. We're doing a round of introductions. So who you are, where you come from, and one interesting thing about yourself.
Okay, sure. So should I proceed?
Sorry, if you don't mind unmuting your video so everyone could see you as you introduce yourself, and then you can mute it immediately after.
Okay, sure. This is me. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Danita, and I'm a research intern at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. I'm originally from Sierra Leone, but I've been living in SA for the past 10 years. An interesting thing about me, my name is a combination of my parents' names, Daniel and Anita. I think it's kind of cute. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Danita, and welcome. Next on my list would be Gunnel from Church of Sweden.
Unmute, and let's see if the video is working.
Yes, it is.
Oh, great. Well, maybe the interesting thing is that I'm the seller in Uppsala in my house. In the above me, my husband is coordinating the fossil-free Sweden initiative by the government. Oh, wow. So, but that's not why I'm in this meeting. I'm with Active Church of Sweden, a partner of SPII, and I'm currently working on a paper on social protection in the COVID crisis, and I will have a case study from South Africa, and so that's why it's not only very interesting to be able to follow the debate that you will have, but also to get really, interesting to listen to your conversation.
All
Thanks.
Right. Thank you so much, Gunnel, and welcome. Next is Huda.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Huda, and I am at the Black Sash, the National Advocacy Manager. I'm particularly interested in Universal Basic Income Grant because we've just launched a campaign working towards Universal Basic Income, where we're using a strategic approach to ask for income support for 18 to 59-year-olds with no or little income.
Thank you so much, Huda, and welcome. Next would be Busisiwe. Msimango.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Busisiwe.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Busisiwe Msimango. I'm a senior pastor from the Church of Word of God, and my interest is to fight for workers. Really, that's my passion. To see injustice to other people, that is very, very my passion. But the interesting thing today is that it's my birthday today, so I'm very, very happy, and I'm also happy to join you all, guys. Thank you.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, and happy birthday.
Should remember to sing happy birthday before we leave today, Tabo.
All right, we'll do that.
Okay.
We'll definitely do that. Next on my list will be Skhumbuzo.
Hi guys, my name is Skhumbuzo Zuma. I am, oh shucks, sorry, forgot. Trying to show my face. Oh, there we go. My name is Skhumbuzo Zuma. I am a research intern at SPII. And an interesting thing about myself, I don't know if this is interesting, but I am obsessed with clouds. So I take, my phone is full pictures of clouds. So that's me, I guess. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Skhumbuzo, and welcome. Next will be Lelona Mlesibe.
Hi, let me just get my video started. Hi everyone, my name is Lelo Namqesibe and I am a junior researcher at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, SPII. And an interesting thing about me, like I've been trying to rack my brain for the last past minutes. I guess my surname is actually a clan name in Xhosa and my clan name is Mambondo. So yeah, Umqesibe and my clan name are two different things. So that's me.
Oh, all right. We learn as we go. Interesting. Welcome. Thanks, Lelona.
Thank you.
Next on my list would be Mati. Or is it Matti?
Either way, depending where you are. And in England, it's Matti. In Finland, it's Matti, where I'm originally from. And an interesting fact is that my surname means a small hill, and it comes from Karelia, from eastern Finland, the name. I'm joining especially because we're developing a scorecard which compares stimulus spending in times of COVID-19 and comparing social protection and stimulus given to corporates, arguing that social protection is better.
Yeah.
So looking forward to learning a lot from all of you and developing these ideas together.
Awesome. All right, great. Thanks, Mati. Next would be Maburi.
Good morning, everyone. Can
Morning,
you hear me?
Maburi. Yes, we can. Morning.
Thank you. My name is Mabore Mugashwa. I'm from Kamagashwa village in Sikukune area. I am an artist, a poet, and an activist. What I do is from what I learn from activism, because I stay in the rural areas, I look at what is happening, the challenges that we have. So I look at our heritage and the things that people are going through. So I'm also interested in the basic income grant because our people are living in poverty, and COVID-19 has showed us that there's a lot of inequality and our people are struggling. So they need something so that they can live better, because the rich people are still rich and they were not being affected by COVID-19 so much like the one who are struggling to put bread on the table. So I use what I learn. I do music, I do poetry to put the message out there, to teach the people and also to tell them what to do. So I'm also a traditional practitioner. So I love my heritage. So I also do the climate change stuff so that people can protect the climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Maburi. Good to have you. Welcome. Next would be, is it Stefan or Stefan?
Hello, Stefan is fine.
All right, morning.
Thank you. Stefan Granlund, I'm a PhD in rural development from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Gunnel invited me to this learning hub, so I'm basically just sitting in, listening to any news on the debate around basic income grant in South Africa. Let's see if I can share the video with you.
Yes, you can. We see you.
So basically, I did my PhD on the social grants in South Africa in Eastern Cape, and the debates around basic income grant and the need for basic income grant today is something that I'm a firm believer in, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about it. Thank you. Well, there's nothing interesting about me. I'm a heavy coffee drinker, so I'm going to fill up my coffee cup now, and let's get to it.
All right. Thanks, Stefan, and welcome.
Thank you.
Next on my list would be, I think it's two people. Duduzile, I'm assuming you're sitting with Archie. If you don't mind introducing yourselves. Or is Archie connected by himself? Actually, let's do Duduzile, then we'll go to Archie. Is Dudu over to you?
Hi, everybody. I'm trying to switch on my video, but my name is Dudu Khadebe. I work for an organization that works on the disabled, works with the disabled, and I am based in KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg. And my interest really in the basic income grant is that I was involved with it when it first started, and I was part of Jubilee. And so looking at now what's been happening with money that's made available through the TERS or with COVID-19 lockdown, the money that gets given to unemployed people, I see that actually it should be possible. So I would like to explore what it means going forward, whether this opens up a possibility for the grant to actually be made universal and to realize it and taking forward some of the work that I was initially involved with that long time ago. There's really not that much that is interesting about me that I would like to share. So if you don't mind, and I'm not sitting with Archie.
Okay. All right, thanks. And you forgot to tell us where you work, Sis Dudu.
Thanks. I did say I work for CREATE, an organization that works with people who have disability.
Okay, all right. I must have missed that, sorry. Okay, next would be Archie, and I think that would be it before I hand over to Tembela. Archie? Archie, are you there? Okay, let me.
Yeah. Talk.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm listening to you, but I don't know how to unmute myself or mute. Yeah. I'm the CBR trainer at CREATE. Dudu is my boss, and I'm very interested in the basic income grant. I've been following cash transfers in Mexico and pilot studies done in Namibia around the basic income grant and seeing how effective they have been in reducing a whole host of outcomes in terms of health, education, livelihoods. So that's why I'm really excited to be part of this webinar. Interesting about me, well, I also like coffee.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Archie, and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let me pass the mic to my colleagues, Zanele, followed by Ashley, before we hand over to our facilitators.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zanele Makombe. I am with ACT Ubumbano. I'm the Program and Gender in SIH Advisor. I'm interested in the basic income grant because when we talk about social justice, we always think of other things and we forget about how we can support women and girls in communities. So this is an interest area. And also because I was involved in the basic income grant discussions when I was still at university, where a professor actually made us write for and against, and we to share all this as part of debate conversations. One interesting thing about me is that I love candles. I love the different colors, the different scents, and the different sizes. Thank you.
Thank you, Zanele.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Green Thompson. I work with Zanele and Tabo at ACT Ubumbano, and I'm just very, very happy that the English Premier League has started again. I'm really, really sad that Kaizer Chiefs don't know how to play football, and they gave the title to Mamelodi Sundowns, which is really not nice. But other than that, I'm really happy to see everybody here, and I hope we have a very interesting conversation that helps us reconnect with the voice of those who are actually the most affected by the issues that we discuss, and not try and get out of our theorizing and intellectual side and actually talk very much about the voice and the experience of ordinary people. So thank you all very much for making the time.
Thanks, Ashley. We just had two new entrants to the conversation. Abdi, if you don't mind introducing yourself, unmute your video while you do that, and tell us one interesting thing about yourself. Abdi, are you there? No? Okay. So I'm, probably missing the second person, but I think it was Abdi and who else that just joined recently or that didn't introduce themselves. I can't see the second person. Tembela, over to you to introduce our guests for today and introducing yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tabo. Let me introduce myself first, and then I will ask Isobel and Skhumbuzo to introduce themselves. I like the idea of people introducing themselves. So you heard, my name is Tembela. I work for Womaniko Transforming Spaces. I am a process facilitator and a coach. I also do a lot of evaluations for different organizations. So I'm one of the people that are facilitating the Learning Hub together with Alan. So I perhaps must share also as well what's interesting about me. For those who don't know, I am a twin. I also have another girl whom we were born together with. On that note, let me invite and welcome Isobel and Skhumbuzo. So the first person who will speak to us today before they introduce themselves is Isobel, and then Skhumbuzo will give a response. After that, we will invite you to ask questions of clarity to both of them, and then we'll have a discussion, an open discussion amongst ourselves. And then after that, Alan will give us a summary of what we've heard, and then we'll close us off. I will also invite Alan to also ask questions when he feels there are questions that need to be asked. So Isobel, do you want to introduce yourself?
I will, thank you. Thanks to Alan and to Ashley for the invitation to share on the Universal Basic Income Grant. My name is Isobel Frye. I'm the Director of Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, which is a not-for-profit research service organization based in Johannesburg. We are now in our 14th year, and one of the main driving principles of our formation was to provide research data for civil society, social justice organizations and campaigns. So it is with great pleasure that we're able to share our analysis and insights into the current basic income grant campaign. And as you can see, SPII is actively present on this platform. So thanks to my colleagues for being present and for the various partners who we work with. It's great to share space and engagement. One interesting thing about myself, okay, I'm cheating because I'm kind of delving in, I'm staying in the professional realm, but I was part of the original basic income grant campaign in 2002 when I moved from being a corporate litigator to working at the Black Sash, having realized that for me, law and justice were not meeting in the South African situation as a result of poverty. So my own personal journey in this realm has been over many years, in fact decades, and it's great to see something such as the basic income grant coming back onto the agenda. So Tembela, that is me. Would you like me to proceed into my presentation, or will Skhumbuzo introduce themselves now or later?
I prefer that Skhumbuzo just introduces himself so that when he gives his response, he will just go ahead. Skhumbuzo?
Greetings, colleagues and everyone who is joining today. My name is Skhumbuzo Zuma. I work for Churchland Program as a program activist. I was asked to give a response. I'm not sure how relevant it would be since as Churchland Program, our main focus is around land issues at this point in time. But however, I think that having had a background also in the early stages of the basic income grant, I was with the Young Christian Workers as the General Secretary at the time of its inception around 2002. I was still a young man, a very young, a young man at the time. I was also an unemployed young person, and that drew us into the campaign. And actually, while people find it interesting, I think my first reaction, you know, to the new interest in the basic income grant now was that it became a bit annoying that for so many years campaigning for the basic income grant being ignored by politicians and them being so arrogant, is that this time around it sounds to me like it's coming back, and now it's being led by the state as if it's something that is originating from the interests of the state. However, it would be interesting then how the conversation develops today, I mean, in this particular second. One thing, I'm not sure whether I do have anything interesting about myself, but I'm very passionate about what I do. And I think I'm a very calm person. That's one thing I can say about me. Thank you.
Thanks, Skhumbuzo. The floor is yours, Isobel.
Thank you. So the screen is being shared. This is what I meant earlier, that I'm not very technically competent. Is that being shared as a full screen with everybody?
Yes, it is.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it is.
Thank you. And if I proceed down, Tabo, how I just do that, right? Tabo?
Yes, do you want me to help you with navigating the presentation? Or?
No, I just want to be able to do it. I'm not sure how to do it. If I press on that arrow, nothing happens. And if
Okay, let me make you host, because I think I had made you co-host, but it seems it might not be working on your end. I'll make you host and you can.
Perfect. And in the interim, Ashley can make small talk for us all.
Yeah, you should be host now, and you should be able to navigate the screen or share your screen on your end.
Okay, they're two different things. Should I share the screen on my end?
Yes, I think that would be best.
Okay.
Let me stop.
I'm getting there.
No worries. There, it's coming through.
Okay. Have you got the full screen now?
Yes, we do.
Great. Okay, I'm going to proceed. Thank you very much. Just letting Vlad Nestor in. So if I could please have some indication if I am going over time, and I should probably start letting people in, right? Yeah. Okay, so the Universal Basic Income Grant. This is a presentation from SPII, and I hope that we will generate a lot of information and discussion going forward. One more thing is I've got on my screen a list of participants to the right. Do you see that?
No.
Perfect.
Yeah,
okay.
We're just seeing your full screen.
That's great. Right, so let me just get rid of that. So many people use different terminologies, different words for describing things, and people also use the same words to differ, even though that's not always very obvious. So I'm just going to define what I mean, and many people who are part of the progressive interpretation of universal basic income or basic income grant mean. So it's important to know that these characteristics, as I said, are the ones that are defined in terms of the left or progressive view of a basic income, and I'll describe why now. So it's a regular payment which is guaranteed, unconditional, of cash to individuals. I think for me, it's important that we understand that it's a guaranteed income. So it is not a conditional income on eligibility. So for instance, if you look at grants that are awarded in Latin America, many of the conditional cash transfers are dependent on things such as the presentation of a child to a clinic or to school. So the assumptions there that poor people need to be instructed how to conduct themselves and raise their family is something that a universal basic income categorically rejects. So the guarantee is due to the fact that you are part of, whether it's a congregation in a country, whether it's in a city, in a region, but it's not due to you jumping through any hoops. The cash payment is to be distinguished from in-kind payments. So, for instance, there's certain schemes, and especially pilot schemes in other developing countries, that are paid through seed or other kinds of inputs to support people's resilience and livelihood strategies. But a universal basic income grant is premised on a cash payment. And it's also important to look at the question of who receives or who's targeted in that sense. The recipient of a universal basic income grant is at an individual basis and not a household level. Now, I was in a webinar last week and people raised the fact that households also receive support in some social policy. What people have found is that when support goes to households, the internal dynamic within that household of decision making is very prominent. And where you have patriarchal systems, it frequently means that women and children are not the main recipient of the benefit, but it goes according to more traditional decision making. The other aspect about household targeting is that we know that poorer households tend to be larger than smaller ones, and so there's a greater dilution if the targeting goes to a household level. So if you look at the first main narrative bullet point there, a universal basic income is not premised on a means test or a categorization eligibility. The benefit of not having a means test is firstly the administration costs. Currently, the Department of Social Development, or SASA, spends a lot of time and effort trying to ensure that they can test people's eligibility according to means. It is a hoop or an obstacle that lies at the heart of stigmatization of cash transfers. If in order to receive a cash transfer, you've got to prove that you are very poor, it robs people of the dignity that a developmental assistance such as universal basic income should be promoting. The other thing about means tests that we see, and we've seen specifically around the social relief of distress, is known as errors of exclusion. Frequently, the poorest and most vulnerable people are not able to negotiate the eligibility criteria in proving themselves eligible, and so you have really the most vulnerable people excluded, rather than few people who are able to be included through errors of inclusion. Because it's a universal cash grant, we don't see anybody being excluded from that. There's also a lot of empirical evidence that shows that regular income enables people to take economic risks. And when I was in the early Basic Income Grant Coalition, there was an organization called SPII that gave a lot of research support to the campaign. And Michael Sampson of SPII illustrated this incredibly well by referring to the possibility of a young mother, unemployed mother, who has 10 Rand in her pocket. Inflation was early 2000s. And the question was, would she use that money in order to go and apply for a job in town, or would she use that money, which was her only money, to buy food for her family? And of course, when poverty creates such dependency, the ability to take risks in order to take up opportunities and economic opportunities is predetermined for you. And so we've actually seen, and that also is through the Child Support Grant and other existing cash transfers, that access to an income grant would actually improve people's ability to be active economically. And of course, it stimulates demand. If you are trying to pursue livelihood strategies, and it depends on people obtaining from you what an economic, social, and cultural rights, the right to social security is guaranteed. So social security, including both social insurance schemes for those who can contribute, such as the unemployment insurance scheme, and social assistance for people who are not able to contribute. So the fact that social assistance grants are available, they should, in a functioning society, be an interlink between social insurance and social assistance. And that's something which we're looking at in South Africa, but it's very, it's in its infancy still. So people support a universal basic income because it can assist in the meeting of human rights. There is linked to that social policy objective of having a stable society, because there is a safety net. So where people are able to have their basic needs met, when they meet times of crisis or go through different parts of life, such as pregnancy, such as old age. A safety net meets people's needs, and you don't have to have people resorting to try to acquire those through methods that might destabilize themselves, their communities, and society. Another argument in favor of a universal cash transfer funded through the fiscus, through tax system, is that it equalizes it equalizes the distribution of income or wealth in a society, because what happens is that those who have surplus are taxed, whether it's an income or wealth, and that gets distributed to those whom the system has failed. So that certainly acts as another form of stabilization, which is the reduction of inequality. In South Africa, we are the most extremely unequal country in terms of income and wealth. And so that's another argument in favor of a tax-funded universal basic income. There's also empirical evidence in the long run that shows that the distribution of cash and for people who are unable to support their basic needs means that there's greater nutritional support for poorer people. So people are able to address their nutritional needs, and over time and over people's life cycles, that leads to better health ultimately if people are not facing malnutrition, starvation at any stage. There is a greater healthcare ability, which means that there's less demand on a state healthcare system. Where people have better nutrition, they're also better able to develop at schools and to work. So you have better educational returns and more economically active people. Sorry, I was going to say sort of fewer economically marginalized people. So people are able to be active in the economy and so contribute again to fiscal demands through paying taxes, through whether it's income taxes or value-added consumption taxes. So all in all, it's a better adjustment to life, and hence for a state that supports its people, fewer demands and more contributions. Also a humanitarian response to vulnerabilities, and that we've seen in the COVID moment, but we've also seen across the world that people who have longer term cash support through some kind of social security system are more resilient when it comes to crises. I've mentioned the fact that bottom-up economic demand to support inclusive growth, such as small micro enterprises, as well as domestic industrialization. So now the demand shock for post-COVID recovery is what many economists are talking about. Instead of trying to go from the top down, supporting businesses, those societies that seem to have recovered are those that shock by adding demand into an individual basis, which goes to a household community and is then able to demand from businesses. So many people have different approaches to why they support basic income. What I said at the beginning is that sometimes people use the same terminology for different things. In the US, for instance, there is some progressive resistance amongst trade unions and other formations to the idea of a basic income, because while we see it as being a component of the social wage, other societies that are more neoliberal see it as being a replacement of the state. So in the US, you would have many people from Friedman and other economists who say that if you give people access to cash, it means that you don't have to offer state healthcare, state education, but people are able to purchase it in and therefore support profit-making generation of social goods. So we say that from our perspective and approach to universal basic income is that it is part of a social safety net rather than a replacement of that social safety net. And that's why it's important to define what you mean when you engage with debates, or else you might find yourself on the wrong end of the spectrum, which is quite a startling place to be. So looking at national interventions in South Africa, there was an introduction of someone who said that they were there at the early days and they're quite peeved to see that the state is now coming around in a full circle to support it. I think it's important to remember the history of a basic income grant on the policy domain in South Africa. In 2002, there was a ministerially appointed committee of inquiry into comprehensive social security arising from a 1998 demand by COSATU at a presidential job summit. The committee of inquiry was headed by Professor Vivian Taylor, and that sat for about 2 years, and from it came a recommendation for a comprehensive system of social security that started with a national social security fund that everybody who was working paid into, and that in turn paid for a social assistance old age pension, as well as a universal basic income. So for those people who were not able to contribute to the National Social Security Fund, that fund would also support unemployment insurance for people who fell out of work. At the heart of it, as the foundational phase, was a universal basic income that would be paid to everybody for those who were paying tax or social security tax. It would be taxed back, but it was a basic floor. So that sort of was not accepted by the state at the point in time when it was released, although different aspects of a comprehensive social security, such as a revised road accident fund, were. And so it's been sitting on the back burner. The conservative elements within the state, such as National Treasury and other decision makers, said they used some of the traditional thoughts that it would discourage employment, that grants were not for working age people, they undermine people's dignity, and adults should be able to work. But essentially it covered an ideological opposition to giving cash grants to people, mostly, I think, due to the rise of neoliberalism and the decline of the idea of social democracy. So it has been reintroduced to NEDLAC as a concept about 8 years ago. I sit in NEDLAC with the community constituency, and we have been having monthly meetings that have looked around a basic income grant for many years now. There has been a kind of stonewalling and resistance, mostly from government, although, as I'll talk now, that's swinging around to business again. But there were years in which National Treasury and Social Development were unable to come up with a common position, and so because government did not have a position paper, it was impossible for us to proceed. So 6 years ago, they introduced a position paper which talked very obliquely of a basic income grant. We've pushed and pushed and pushed, and it is now on the agenda. We've just on Friday are going through research reports that was commissioned to look at the fiscal feasibility of a basic income. So it's not a revolutionary space. In fact, it's not even a sort of deep reform space, but for some of us, including community constituency and organized labor, it's been important to keep the policy space around a basic income grant open so that other initiatives can bring pressure to bear. There is a debate within the ruling party, the ANC, that is around a basic income grant. There is a similar sort of standoff between the National Executive Committee's Social Transformation and Economic Transformation Committees. And right now, the two subcommittees have been asked to come and present a unified position to the NEC, which was meant to have taken place last week. I'm not sure whether that did take place. I don't think it did. But it is being debated. There is a deep conservatism that I was not prepared for when I sat in on the STC and ETC meeting 3 weeks ago. People saying that you don't want to give cash to working age people, that framing that I said, that narrative of dependency coming through from people who themselves have spent time in exile in social democracies and socialist USSR. It was quite disappointing to see. But there is that space there, and it's certainly open to political leverage, which is what I will conclude when I get to my final slides. The media has been really interested in a basic income grant, and I'm sure Huda from Black Sash and the campaign will speak to this. I frequently get asked to talk about basic income grants. So the media have been a great ally in keeping the debates alive. And of course, social media from people who are interested pushing that. The president himself has been very been in favor of a basic income grant in certain questions to the media. And in fact, the SANIF engagement last week was something which he supported it. At NEDLAC a couple of weeks ago, I raised it, and the Minister of Finance kind of tried to kill it quite cruelly, and the president came forward and rescued it. And in fact, there was a line that was quite peculiar. He said to me, Isobel, just because a certain Minister of Finance dismisses it doesn't mean that it's not a solution to a national crisis. So I don't know what there was him trying to stick needles into Tito, but he certainly came forward and said that it was something that he thinks needs to be interrogated for adoption, which is very beneficial. And then, of course, the international examples of pilots. Guy Standing is someone who's run a number of pilots in developing countries. We see that there are pilots in Finland, and recently Germany's announced that it's going to run a pilot. So there are a number of both national and global interventions which can be used to sustain and support arguments in favor of a basic income grant. So, Chair, you need to, I do tend to get carried away on my slides, so I give few slides and convince myself that I'm speaking very quickly, but just give me a heads up. So I just want to address some myths because it's important to know what the opposition argues. So I think the prevailing myth for me is that in terms of looking at post-COVID interventions, many people argue that we need to get back to where we were. We don't need to get back to where we were. We were having increasing levels of unemployment, 40% in terms of expanded definitions, 70% of youth unemployment, high levels of structural unemployment, people not getting back into the job market, incredibly high levels of poverty as well as starvation, and our economy was in the second quarter of recession. We don't want to get back to where we were. We need to be better than where we were, and our decisions need to be a lot more robust in order to get us there. I think another myth is that growth is good of whatever kind. If we start looking at growth paths and recovery, we need to make sure that the growth is distributed far more fairly. Now, in conventional economics, that means through the labor market. We know that globally the world of work is something which is not going to be part of our futures. So that the role of the state in being an active redistributor needs to be encouraged. We do, however, need to admit that, be open to the fact that a basic income grant is not a panacea. We need a variety of interventions, including industrialization and labor market interventions, active labor market interventions to enable people to move into a growing labor market through industrialization. But a basic income grant, we believe, is at the heart of people's ability to engage in economic activity, both as active participants in terms of demand and in terms of being able to supply labor or the kinds of interventions of their own contributions to the economy. One of the myths is that we don't know what a basic income grant would do, so we need to stick to the orthodox economic interventions. If you analyze this over decades, that recently means neoliberal economic interventions. There was a whole slew of Keynesian interventions which looks at stimulus, at using the economy to work for people rather than being delinked from people. I mean, the economy is not meant to be something which you pursue for its own gain, but in order to ensure the well-being of people. If you look at 100 years ago when economics became a so-called science, that was the aim. So we need to look at heterodox interventions, which in fact predate the neoliberal orthodox economic interventions. There is a huge sense of the poor need to work for their cash. It's a linked to European or English poor laws of the sort of 1800s that you had the deserving and the undeserving poor. So working age people, if they're not earning, are clearly undeserving. They're lazy layabouts and they shouldn't be helped. Now, if you look at the structural unemployment and inequality, how people are marginalized from the economy, that just doesn't work here. Apart from that, you have universal human rights that people's basic needs should be met. What we see and what we've seen since 2002 is that the ruling party rejected a universal basic income grant. And in an attempt to show that they were not oblivious to the needs of working age people, tried to expand a failing public works program. And in fact, we are now, I think, in EPWP, Expanded Public Works Program 4. The evidence suggests that public works is not, again, a panacea for structural unemployment. If you have a shock such as an outbreak of disease and people need to be brought back into the labor market after the Second World War. In the US, Roosevelt used public works to get people back into the labor market. It's not a system which can create jobs in the longer term. And just because you expect people to sweat for the kind of equity that you're prepared to give them doesn't mean that that's the way that we should be going. Work does bring dignity, but public works, older women picking up rubbish at the side of the road for 3 months is not a way towards dignity. I've already addressed the myth that a big will encourage people not to work or discourage people to work. I think whatever the amount of a basic income grant compared to the stability of wages and salaries just doesn't add up. And then the myth that we cannot afford it financially. And that just leads me on to my next slide about critical debates going forward. The whole question of affordability is linked to the level of the cash grant. So to begin with on the financing, there are a number of sources of financing of a universal income grant that have not been put on the table. So off budget sources such as our fully paid up PIC, the government employees pension fund. We don't have to have fully paid up funds because you're not going to have the entire public service resigning or getting retrenched or finishing work on the same day. There is a lot of flexibility there. We've also had people talking about quantitative easing. In short, the kind of populist quantitative easing or creation of more money in order to stimulate economic return and recovery is something which we've been very quick to reject without actually looking at how we are in a new situation and new rules need to apply. So where we fund the initial basic income grants, there are many examples of areas that haven't been looked at. In addition to that, there are many econometric models that show that the multiplier second round effect of benefit from people receiving a universal basic income means that the gross cost becomes a much lower net cost. But again, people who are opposed to this are not prepared to look at that. The affordability is an important debate to have. Many people, and this goes into the question of rolling out universal coverage, many people argue that you should start small and grow big. In fact, that was the First Coalition's slogan. What we've seen in terms of social policy is that if you go in a way that tries to make things palatable, whether it's head count coverage or whether it's amount, you generally tend to stick there. Whereas if you go in at a higher level and make sure that there are the kinds of mechanisms made in order to afford that, you have a better ability or possibility of having the kind of income support that really matters to people. So that's a really important debate. I mean, if you look at the child support grant that when it was introduced in 1997 was going to be 70 Rand and then became 100 Rand and was only available to children under 7. It's actually taken constitutional court challenges to expand it to where it is now to children up to the age of 18. And even the amount which is below the food poverty line is something which has to be won. So that's something which I would argue needs to be openly and transparently debated. Where you make compromises in negotiations, everyone tends to lose out. So that needs to be surfaced. And then another debate going forward. Yeah.
You've already run out of the time. Can you try to come to a conclusion very soon?
Yeah, I did ask for warnings around it because of this. So I'll just include my slides very quickly. So the variations on the theme of a job guarantee scheme, extended public works, community development grants. As I say there, these have their place, but they should not ever be seen as a replacement of a basic income grant. The community development or community works program is also something which has shown that the costs of rolling out EPWP or community works program often are a huge demand on the budget. So in certain places you have up to 40% of the budgeted amount for EPWPs going towards the management and the intermediaries. So basically just looking forward, and this is where the rest of today's discussion will happen, are the pressure points for change. So as I've said, there is an ideological debate. This needs to, if people have linkages into the tripartite alliance, that needs to be a challenge thrown out on social democracy. I see the window for structural change closing rapidly in South Africa. COVID was a moment which threw things up in the air. If you look at the mainstream business and government debates, they are going back to an elite recovery. And I don't think that the left has really seized the space in any solid way. So, I mean, the last 3 points are, I think the only way that the left could actually make this work is through mass mobilization. I know that Costart is challenging it, like the Gatherings Act, but unless the decision makers and those in elite see that their political future will be threatened, I don't think you're going to see any change in that. So my last point is it perhaps the wording of a basic income grant that is wrong? Because given the levels, the increasing levels of poverty, given the pre-existing levels of poverty, and if you look at the critical moments around Arab Spring and other uprisings, we haven't seen people on the street. And that's something which means the only conclusion I can draw is that people who are articulating this message, we sort of in NGOs are not getting the messaging right. What is the question that social movements could carry forward? And what is it that membership-based organizations and social justice organizations in this debate could suggest in terms of a broader mobilization? Because that's the way that a basic income grant will become social policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isobel, for that. I'm sorry that you didn't see my message earlier. It's always difficult to see, to look at the chat when you are presenting. But I'm hoping that through the discussion, we'll be able to come back to some of the points perhaps that we are not able to cover. And on that note, I would want to invite Skhumbuzo to unmute and show himself and provide us with a response to what we have heard. I understand, Skhumbuzo, you have questions that you have been given to speak on specifically.
Thank you, Thembela. Yes, indeed. There are 3 questions that I was given. I'll just read them out. The first question was, why do I think this mass mobilization is not happening? The second question, what are the barriers to community-based organizers and organization engaging in policy making? Thirdly, how can the day-to-day experience of marginal communities get reflected in the national dialogue? Yeah, so those are the 3 questions I will attempt to respond to. Okay, To start off, there are no simple answers to these complex issues that we are dealing with, particularly where human agency is required. So on the question of mass mobilization, for me, my observation is that I think that one of the challenges may be around the analysis of the current context. I think that there needs to be a deepened analysis about the current context. I think that, again, there are issues around what is being assumed in terms of our democracy. And that the same project of democracy, which I think is in conflict with the state project, are at conflict, because you have what is being pushed from society, and you have what the state is pushing. And I feel that those two are at loggerheads. I also feel that generally we are drawn into the state project and then assume that the solutions lie in the hands of the state. I'm also referring to the current debate around the basic income grant. As I was saying, is that there was this first phase in the initial stages around 2002, as Isobel had said, which emerged out of the discussions, or the led by the broader society. And at this point in time, it's becoming popularized as a state project in a sense, because of the COVID experience, and now the debate is coming up again, but then again, it's led by the state. But I wasn't at privy with maybe some of the things that were mentioned by Isabella. I think that she said the debate re-emerged about 8 years ago, and it's been ongoing. So to my count, it means 18 years, I mean, from 2002. I think another sorry about that. I got disconnected. I'm having trouble with my connection. Okay, yeah. My point was that it's either we have not or cannot agree about our practice and with relation to the state. What is our relationship to the state? What is our proximity to the state? Are we working with at a distance from the state, or are we working as close to the state? It's issues around trust. Are we approaching the state as an institution that could be trusted, or we are approaching it with suspicion? Also, with that regard, if you are an activist on the ground, can NGOs be trusted? Or civil society be trusted by those who are actors on the ground? Again, where does the agency lie? Does the agency lie with activists on the ground, or it lies within civil society leading these kinds of debates and argument, and then people from the ground supporting? I think that is one other critical issue for me. Another one is around power dynamics. Who holds the power in all this discussion? Is it your day-to-day or persons, or is it held by civil society, or is it held by the state? Yes. Again, in that relation, how does the power itself relate to to the to the state power once we have addressed the issue around the debate around power. One other issue that emerges for me is the question around the demands. I think that there are too many demands coming from all cycles. But the question also remains about the autonomy, because for me, I feel like there's a lot of demands, but there's less autonomy. We seem to be drawn into many debates that emerge, but people don't seem to be uh, they don't seem to hold their ground on a one particular demand. I mean, speaking of the big, I'm sure there are many other campaigns that have emerged beyond the basic income grant or are happening alongside the basic income grant. So what is our stance around it? Let me move on to the next question around the barriers. The question around the barriers to community-based organizers and organizations engaging in policy making. Yes, with that regard, the question that comes out for, that emerges for me is there an intention by the state to allow a meaningful engagement by mass community-based organizers and organizations? I think, and if you given the timeline, that the first introduction was around 2002 for the basic income grant, and now it's 2020, and there's still a debate going on. Does that give us an indication that actually the state wants to hear or have a meaningful engagement around this issue? I think for me, there's this critical issue that the state does not feel that this is a terrain for your ordinary people to be engaging around. It seems like it should be business people, it should be your unions, it should be your civil society, but it becomes very difficult because platforms are not offered to those who are affected the most to be involved in such discussions. Again, with us, the civil society itself, does it allow these voices to emerge on their own? Do we also offer the same? Or we want to be the voice of the voiceless? Again, there are questions around the technicality, the issues around technicality, that an ordinary voice, is it able to engage, or this is an issue that should be engaged by technical people, your lawyers, your economists, your professors, your everything. So I think that that remains a question. Again, the issue around language barrier. The language that is being used, is it the language for your ordinary people, or it's the language for the elite? So I think that it's a critical thing to engage on. Again, the kind of platforms that are being offered or that are put in place, are these kind of platforms where your ordinary people can be adequate or comfortable within, or it's the kind of platforms that become intimidating for them to be able to engage at that kind of level? I think that one example that I was looking at is that in the initial stages of the RDP, how it was engaged, how the project of RDP, when it got mass support was because of the kinds of platforms that were being created in order for people to be able to engage. I don't see that happening around the basic income grant and any other issues like critical issues like land. Those kind of platforms are not being provided for. The last question is around how can the day-to-day experience of marginal communities get reflected in the national dialogue? To me, what is important is that there is constant and persistent disruption of the status quo. I think for me that is key in being able to subvert the kind of power, the power dynamics that are existing at this point in time. We need to think critically about our own practice. You know, our practice as we sit around this table, you know, as civil society, but even for activists themselves, they also need to think critically about their own practice. Because to me, in most cases, we mirror what the government does. You know, we always want to have an elite people sitting at a table in front, offering responses to the questions for people who are sitting on the ground. What about change in position? Have those, the majority of people sitting in the front and have the elites sitting and listening into these conversations about what people think should be done. Also, I think that it is quite important to affirm the agency where it really belongs in the hands of the people themselves. Is that they are the ones who are taking up the spaces, and they are the ones who are flocking the spaces where these debates are taking place, instead of those who have the privilege to being there and then speaking on their behalf. But I think that sometimes we need to discipline ourselves to hold back and allow these voices to emerge and allow these platforms for people to be able to engage for themselves. Another thing is that some of our interventions themselves tend to be disruptive. You know, for instance, we mean well when we take matters to court, and those because we have the resources to do so as NGOs. But I think that sometimes that alone undermines the agency of people, because once they are organized, then they are able to take matters into their own hands and be able to disrupt the status quo. But when we assume those spaces, the court themselves are not friendly to your ordinary people. They are only friendly to those who are attuned to the law, like the lawyers and them. But it tends to undermine the power of the people mobilizing for themselves. And last issue that I was raising a question around is the media, the role of the media. What becomes the agenda for the day is determined by the publicity that is enjoyed by that particular campaign. And we do not have the resources in most cases to ensure that such issues that are raised by your ordinary citizens or your ordinary people are enjoying the kind of platform that is enjoyed by the politicians. So I think that also raises the issue for me. Yeah, I think that those were some of the thoughts that I came up listening to the debate and also thinking for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Skhumbuzo, for that response. You actually challenging us on a lot of things, both CSOs and the activists themselves, and of course, like the state. I'm not going to add anything on what you have both said, but also given the time, I want to invite us to throw some questions of clarity that we might have to both Isobel and Skhumbuzo. just questions of clarity at this moment. And then from there on, we will go into the comments that are on the chat and then the open discussion. Can you also indicate whom you are throwing your question to, so that we're able to facilitate this better? I must also mention that when we find there's silence, we always throw people under the bus, and we just ask anybody that comes into mind to come up with a question. Okay, Alan, you have a question?
In terms of process, if you'd like to answer a question, just put your video on and we can see it. If you can't find the raise your hand button. But I think we have a question. Okay, Comrade Ashley raised his hand. Shall we go?
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Usually I keep quiet in these things, but I thought that this was there was so much richness in both the presenters that I wanted to get my question. I started typing it and then I got way late. Anyway, so I think what we saw is Isobel, I think, giving us probably the most comprehensive presentation on BIG, that one pig that I've ever heard. So thanks very much for that, and I think it's important. Even though sometimes she was getting into the Keynesian economic definitions that were confusing me. And then I think Skhumbuzo asks he challenges us and says, how do we actually more meaningfully even translate that very technical language into stuff that is able to generate community movement and activism for change? So I think we're trying to marry two worlds, and I suppose that's my question to both Isobel and to Skhumbuzo, and I think other comrades in the meeting. How do you take something that is a good thing, which is a basic income grant, and how do you make it resonate with communities who every day are battling to defend their dignity? And how do you take it out of the language of the technocrats and put it into the language of activists and communities and movements? So, yeah.
So let's maybe just take a cluster of questions, because I think Busisiwe was asking a question about, so how do you respond to the idea that people say that then people, if you give a basic income grant, people will be dependent on social grants for life? I think maybe you addressed that a little bit in the presentation, Isobel, so maybe possibly one for you. And then Guno has a question for Skhumbuzo directly. If you can just maybe ask that question directly, Guno.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure, and thank you very much. But I'm not sure I understood what you were saying about the state. But my interpretation would be that people don't have, and there is no reason to have enough trust in the state to imagine that a UBI could actually be implemented. So, so it's really, if I am am I interpreting it right? And yeah, I could come back, but that's enough. Thanks.
So shall we maybe do those two responses, and then I don't want to put Skhumbuzo and Isobel on the spot for what is a broader question to everybody, and around from Ashley around, so how do we connect these two worlds? What are the things that we need to be thinking about and doing to connect these two spaces, which at the moment seem very separate and almost impossible to connect, given some of the challenges that both of the speakers have highlighted? So maybe, Skhumbuzo, you unmuted already, so over to you.
Sure. It was by default, but okay. I'm not sure whether I can be able to respond to the question, but I think my question started where if we are going to assume that South Africa is a democracy, but I subscribe to Neo Cosmos thoughts about states, that when you speak about the state, you are talking about the police, you are talking about capitalism and how the police play a role of protecting capitalism. And that's the role of the state. So if you are departing from there, you become suspicious towards the state and a state-led project. And as I'm saying, that for me, it's when the debate is now being led by the state in terms of where we are at this point in time, when you begin to hear social development or the ANC, who all this time have been the protectors of capital, and now all of a sudden have found a conscience 18 years later to begin to have this discussion. To me, it's a way of distorting the reality, because these inequalities have always been raised. But when COVID hits us, it's like, oh, wow, such a thing has happened to us. How do we respond? Oh, by the way, we've been working on the universal income grant, and this is an opportunity to begin to introduce it. It should have been introduced years and years ago. So I think my take about it is to say that I'm very much suspicious at where we locate ourselves in this debate with regards to the state. Where do we put the state? To me, this is a debate where the state needs to come to us, not us going to the state and presenting to the state what are our thoughts. But it's a matter of the state now coming to us and saying, we've been ignoring you, we've been dismissive of you, we've been arrogant, and now we humble ourselves. We really want to have a beneficiary debate around this matter, and how do we make how do we use this opportunity from the lessons of COVID, taking the project forward? Yeah, I'm not sure whether I have responded, but those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Skhumbuzo. I think you're opening up a really interesting line of conversation going forward, so we'll pick that up. Isobel, around the idea of, well, it's social grants for life and dependence.
Thanks. I'm going to answer that, and then I'm going to move into my view on the interesting debate. So, see, it's a tricky one, because I earn a salary and I'm dependent on the income of my salary to pay my rent and to buy the food and to pay school fees. So I think in this capitalist society that we exist in, there is a dependency on income. The question is where you get that income from. And so if you look, for instance, at the kind of more social democratic planning, you would get access to certain benefits that will come in good through the social wage. So that's education, healthcare, possibly housing. And you would then you would have the need for income. Now, that would either come through waged income, through private wealth, if you're one of the sort of 1%. And if the society is not able to give you access to the employment in order to get the wage, then through a cash support. So it's a tricky, for me, it's indicative of the failing, the way that the economy is failing South Africans, is that they are not sufficient jobs. I know that globally, as I mentioned, the kind of debate is the fact that well before the fourth industrial revolution, we were moving into a phase of no full employment because of the ways that production mechanization was increasing. So I think the dependency argument really needs to be stripped down to its core, which is to not avoid the term dependency. As I said, I start off by saying I'm dependent on my salary. Without a month's salary, I would be in dire situation. But then to say, where would that income from, instead of a salary, come from? And see the very strong role that we ascribe to the state in being a distributor of failing systems. I hope that responds. It's also a question of the multiplier effect that I mentioned, that if you do have cash circulating, it creates its own second round multiplier effects. And so that enables dead economies to have life sort of revived into them, and so supply that. I think the argument about we should expect the state to be coming forward is an interesting debate, because I've heard many people say that that contestation around the state is necessary, that you don't expect the state to come to you, but you force the state to go to where you want it to go. I think it also comes down to the question of a representative democracy. So I don't know why 26 years later, the majority of people are still voting for a political party that doesn't represent their interests. I would say that I would have expected an alternative party to have come forward, a success which represents people's interests, because in a democracy, you would imagine that given that each vote is equal, so one vote, my vote is equal to somebody else's vote, that the majority of votes would be cast for policies that are in the interest of the majority of people. So we know it's a democracy, votes are equal, and yet the majority of people are poor. Now that doesn't square for me. Why are we seeing that votes are being cast for political parties that don't represent the interests of the majority? I would love to see that debate happening, because I think that the counterpart to that, which Skhumbuzo was talking about, was disruption. If we see social movements disrupting, I think that's important, but there are different leverages of space and power. If the formal parliamentary parties are not representing people, firstly, what are people's obligations in terms of democracy to change that? And secondly, where are the other levers of power, especially given the demise and implosion of organized labor as a countervailing force for the working class and poor?
Thank you, guys. So two big questions sitting there, right? And maybe I am going to pick on somebody. Maybe Huda, as somebody who is now running a popular campaign, what do you think the gaps are in terms of building this mass space? How do you connect what you hope will be a popular campaign? How do you connect the components that you need in order to be able to generate the mass that we're talking about in this conversation? What are you starting?
I think the key lesson learned from the 2002 campaign, of which Black Sash was a key partner amongst with faith-based organizations and COSATU, for example, and Isobel was part of Black Sash at that time, so she can actually speak better to it than me. But one of the lessons was political will, and another one was the need for mass mobilization, and also just challenging it legally in terms of the state obligation and enforcing that by putting legal pressure and taking it to court. So the Black Sash campaign of the 18 to 59 cohort was, as Isobel explained about the unemployment, which has just gotten worse over time despite empty promises of job creation, was identifying this missing middle of 18 to 59 who have no or little income and obviously are most affected by not receiving or being able to be employed. But now the key thing is you have these different narratives or engagement dialogues within different sectors. For example, you have webinars that is by researchers and academics that will provide stats on how much unemployment there is, and then it's missing the human element of what is actually happening on the ground. So through the acknowledgement about this 18 to 59 year missing middle, where they have now identified and introduced this COVID SRD grant for this cohort of people, it provides the space for Black Sash to understand what the impact is of this grant. So it's a limited period. It is for 6 months. And so we have been monitoring that on the ground to see, has it impacted on people's lives? I mean, 350 Rand is below the food poverty line. But it's not about what the upper bound poverty line is, what the food poverty line is. It is about what amount do people need to survive. So I agree with understanding what is happening on the ground. So through the community partners, we are trying to get people's stories. Just the administrative process of applying for the grant has been challenging. It's an online platform, so that's already an issue. You know, the language barriers are problematic, and understanding that it's actually 0 rated, so it's only for unemployed. And so every time we are inundated with our helpline getting complaints about people who cannot access this grant. So it's important for government to understand what are the stories, what are the challenges that are being faced, and we're using this grant as a lens to get into people's life and see how just the small amount people can't even, the state is not providing, and it's been problematic.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I forgot, sorry, I don't have the hands raised thing on, so I can't see. Okay, so maybe Dudu, as somebody also working quite closely with an even more marginal group, what are some of the, and somebody who really understands sort of barriers for people's participation, what are some of the challenges that you think might need to be overcome in a space of this kind, where we have this high-level policy conversation and we need to connect it to people's lived realities and get them to get up and campaign alongside us? What, if you could maybe reflect on your experience in the sector you're working in, and what lessons there might be for others to think about?
Yes, Alan. So yeah, I think for me, really what resonates is the importance of bringing the marginalized themselves into this conversation and making sure that we understand their lived realities. I mean, I do appreciate the importance of the work that has happened in the past few years behind the scenes, where, of course, you know, we're punching the numbers and doing the academic work and the political work. However, you know, we work with people who, young people who are on the street, who are finding themselves having to fend for their lives on the street. And we need to be looking at what is their situation, and how can they be supported. And a lot of the issues that you made there with the marginalized groups that we work with is the fact that, as Isobel has said, it's unemployment, and it pushes people to make decisions that sometimes we tend to judge, and we don't understand their lived reality. So for me, the important thing, going back to Skhumbuzo, what he was saying, is the reality that we need to get into understanding how can we bring these marginalized groups into the conversation. So using the information that has been gathered, the academic work that has been made, and understanding how can we use their own voice, and they're able to understand these issues themselves as well, and begin to mobilize, because we can't only just bring marginalized people to the conversation only when we want to, you know, the masses, and we want the mobilization. We actually need to journey with them. And I feel my sense as we're talking right now is that, you know, that momentum of mobilization was lost, since the times when we were working with the groups like Black Sesh and so on, and other faith movements. I do think that really we need to bring back the conversation to where people are at, and to also make sure they have and they are on streets and they are putting pressure on those who are making decisions, because ultimately the lived realities are those of the people who are marginalized. So we can't keep them outside of these conversations, and so we need to find a way of bringing them onto the conversation, and actually making sure that when we talk about these issues, and they, when there's research being done, when there's conversations happening at net level, how are those fed into the mobilizing, the ongoing mobilizing, and making sure that we're getting the stories. For instance, now we have an opportunity with this grant that is coming in for 6 months. How do we make sure that we use this opportunity to actually revive the mobilization, and make sure that now we bring back the conversation, and people are part of that conversation? So that for me would be the important aspect of this work, of bringing people into the conversation that really affects them, and they need to be part of these conversations, and we interpret the economic terms and so on in ways that they could understand, and in ways that relate to them, and they can be able to see in terms of the long queue that you see whenever there is a post office where people sleep outside of the office from 4 o'clock at night because they're waiting to be first in the line so that they won't be turned away. So all of these experiences, I think they need to make sense of them based on their current experiences. So that would be my comment.
Thank you, Dudu. Skhumbuzo, you had a hand up. Do you still have a question? But before I give you the floor, the mic, Skhumbuzo, Mabore, if you can maybe think about, as Skhumbuzo speaking, in your work of translating complex issues like climate change into a community response, what lessons can you share with this group about how you've worked with complex technical issues and made it more real for people in your home community? So if Skhumbuzo can make his input, and then we can follow on with Mabore, please. Skhumbuzo?
Yes.
Shall I continue?
Thank you, Alan. Just one small issue I wanted to highlight. Sis Dudu did refer a bit to it about how young people can be involved. I think for me, there are movements like Abahlali Basemjondolo who have managed, to mobilize around, young people, old people together for particular campaigns around access to land in urban areas. That I think for me, it is important also to learn from these movements what that is able to attract people into following and supporting the campaigns that they are doing. TAC has managed in masses, into their campaign. Maybe it's time that we also take less, as to learn how they have managed to do this. There are so many things that are happening around, and maybe our downfall is claiming easy victories. The bigger picture, we focus on these small victories that we gain, and then we end there. They become our end. whereas they are supposed to be our means to an end. So I think we need to clarify that. What is it really that we are trying to achieve? Even for me, the basic income grant is not an end, but in itself, but it's a means. It's a campaign for a bigger picture. And for me, it should be around issues of emancipation. Is that through these campaigns, people are beginning to emancipate themselves from the clutches of the system of capitalism that is oppressing them. Thank you.
Thanks, Skhumbuzo. Over you too, Mabore.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Before I can continue, I would like to share something that is happening in the arts and culture sector. What is happening now is most of the people in art are not working. They use their talent to create jobs and make money, meaning the art is only their source of their income. And what is happening now, COVID-19 has been here and lockdown started in March. There was a relief fund and they haven't received anything. And now they are planning to go and march. I think it was on Wednesday because they are still planning. And this shows us that people are struggling. They are trying to use their talent. They're trying to make means to live, but they need help. So with this basic income grant, it will help people because people are struggling now. So the artists are struggling even if there is a relief fund. A lot of money is there, but I'm also scared that we'll be hearing about the scandals that were happening in the PPE tenders. So the money is there, but it's being looted. Am I taking time?
That's great, Mabore. I think bringing that real experience is really important. Maybe if you could just extend the conversation a little bit and maybe talk about what have you been doing to take a complicated issue like climate change and make it real in your community. How are you mobilizing around technical issues in your community or in the spaces that you work in? What has helped? What has worked? What hasn't worked?
Okay, what happened is I mostly do art, and with music, that's when you can access more people. They listen to your songs, they listen to the poems, and they ask you questions. We had it was an awareness where I spoke about climate change, and most of the people didn't know what climate change is. And when I started telling them that the things they do in their environment, that is what is causing climate change. And this showed me that most of the people still need campaigns. They still need more awareness to tell them what is happening. So with the climate change, I spoke to more people and I also put more effort in doing those poems. And I also there's a song that I wrote, it's called Pula. That song, it speaks about our heritage. It speaks about climate change also, what is happening. And most of the people just see that there's no water now. They don't know what the cause is. But with me attending the meetings and learning from other activists, that's what I was doing in my community, to tell them about what is happening so that they won't be surprised to see that there's no water, there's no rain, and people are no longer plowing in the fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabore. Okay. So I'm going to open up a little bit more now, just for people to reflect on what they've heard so far. Does anything resonate for you? Does anything make you say, I've got something to add here, or I disagree with this? And I saw Ashley's hand. So maybe Ashley first, and then while Ashley's talking, people can then just prepare themselves to make some kind of statement, because I'm going to go through the list. Over to you, Ashley.
The reason why my hand kept on going up and going down is because I was quite ambivalent about whether I should speak, but I think this is a great opportunity to have a different conversation about how we do social justice work and advocacy, because I think inherent in what Skhumbuzo was saying, but to a lesser extent what Isobel was saying, is how much you rely on the technical convincing of a state to do the right thing. And if you see the state as just technical policymakers who, if we charm them in the right way, and if we explain to them the advantages of what we are doing, then they will come on board and they will display their political goodwill and they will implement policies that actually enhance the lives of people. But I think Skhumbuzo was articulating a position that starts from a fundamental suspicion of the state as an agent of a system that is not really interested in the well-being of people, but looks at economic activity in order to continue to generate wealth without any regard for whether it actually reaches people on the ground. And I think that that's for me what I'm not getting my head, I suppose it's about ongoing conversations, is it's not just a question of let's hear the experience of people. And if you look at ubumbanovoice.com, our website, and if you look at the voice app that we have, where community activists are telling stories of what's been happening during lockdown, that's just a narrative. That's a description of the story. I would like us to go more deeply into just the simple matters of community survival. So poor people survive because they have an innate refusal to lie down and to accept the violations of their dignity, and they stand up. And it's that kind of experience and knowledge that I'm quite curious to explore, at the same time as looking at how we continue the onslaught through our advocacy work on policymakers. And it's not something that happens in half an hour or 2 hour conversation. I think it's something that becomes part of our practice. As we build a movement, we've got to make sure that we are constantly alive to the need to cultivate those relationships and to learn from those experiences. It's a little bit all over the place, but you know, that's what these spaces are for, is us to muddle through ideas that are not clear in our heads and try and hear from others how they are seeing a different practice of doing social justice, if you want. Now I'm going to keep quiet, I promise, till the end.
So I'm now going to put people on the spot, right? Because I think we really do try to hear everybody's voice in these sessions. So I'm going to ask Thabo to maybe use his list to just take us through people, just for a sort of a summary statement from you. What have you heard? What has interested you? Is there anything that you're sitting with that you think really needs to be said before we try to wrap the session up? So Thabo, if you can use your list, please.
Perhaps before Thabo comes in, there are 2 comments on the chat, Alan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you carry on, Chembela.
Yeah, one is from Zanele, who's saying, I agree with Dudu. It seems the marginalized become recipients of programs. How do we have them as part of defining the solutions and contributors in defining what they want? And then I think that it's also from Zanele, state or society, the contestation of ownership is always a huge concern. Does it matter who comes to the other? Or it is a question of implementing proven models that work and the state taking responsibility? And then from Gano, he's saying, if you don't believe that the state could become redistributive, is it at all relevant to speak about social protection policies and UBI? I'm not sure what UBI is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very conscious of time. It would be really nice to dive a little bit deeper, but I think we'll take those questions out and those comments out and keep them in the notes and the report that comes through. But if anybody wants to respond to us,
Sorry, can I just come in here quickly? UBI is critical that people understand is universal basic income. So I think I used them at the beginning. So BIG, basic income grant, or universal basic income. Cool.
Yeah. So as we each get a chance to make some kind of closing statement, if there's anything that you've heard so far that you want to reflect on as well, please feel free to do so. So then I'm going to hand over to Thabo to just take us through the list of people that we still have, and then I will try to give us some kind of succinct summary before we close the meeting. Over to you, Thabo.
All right. Yeah, so I've got Archie on my list. I don't know if you want me to call them out, and I'm also just noting maybe people that might have not contributed as much. Yes. So Archie, if you've got any inputs or anything that you'd like to feedback, this would be your moment. Okay, I think we might have lost him. Okay, maybe let's hear from Brandon.
Also think Brandon's not on anymore. I can't see him on the
fallen off. Okay.
Yeah.
I just saw him now. All right. I guess guys are dropping off as we go down the list. Mati, anything that might have been of interest from you, maybe from a UK perspective? I think you might be on mute if you're trying to say something. Okay, I think we've lost him. Njabulo, would you like to input into the conversation? Anything you've heard that might be of interest to you or your specific community?
Okay. Thank you very much. So, greetings to everyone. I think for me, it's just a small contribution, particularly referring to what Comrade Skhumbuzo and Comrade Dudu, what they said around, the participation of young people in such conversations, and to say that what lessons can we draw to from movements like Abahlali Basemjondolo, where they have been able to actually bring young people in to participate in matters which it seems like they far-fetched from young people, particularly men. And also, again, how then do we create an inclusive engagement, an inclusive conversation from the word go, where it includes young people, and again, touching this on marginalized and young people where one has worked with, because again, they can think it's a matter of just providing that conducive space and an inclusive one. I think for me, that's where I would just wanted to contribute for, to say that how do we get young people to participate? And again, when one continue working young people, you see there's an element of losing hope to what has been occurring and what they have been receiving from the media. And that's what young people only base or make the decision from what they consume from media. And there are no spaces where to break it more simply for them, them to understand, and we saw the decline of young people participating in voting. And again, it would be a very interesting conversation to see what young people think as we prepare ourselves next year to vote, and see young people participate and there's no hope of what is happening as they going and pushing and activities to our post.
Sorry, Jabulo, you seem to be cutting there. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I think we got the gist of it, of how the youth can be involved in this conversation, and maybe an interesting case study is as you've mentioned from Abahlali, and how they've gotten the youth involved in the basic income grant. Maybe let me ask Stefan, is there anything you'd like to, any reflective thoughts you'd like to give?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation and the interesting presentation. When I listen to this, maybe, I don't know if it's a question to Isobel or the South Africans.
Skhumbuzo.
How many actually do get the temporary COVID-19 grant now? And do you see any kind of possibility for a sort of bigger demand from below, seeing as even though it's not a lot of money, but it is still, from what I've heard, a sizable number of people that are getting the temporary grant now? Do you see any kind of sort of a demand from below even after October, November, when it will end? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Stefan. Ellen, did you want to?
No. I was just going to maybe ask somebody to reflect on what they see as a possibility, that this would turn into demand, but maybe that's for another conversation. Yeah, if you can just maybe carry on through the list. Sorry, Chavo.
All right. Yeah, I think apart from these guys, I mean, it would be then either Lelona or Khomotsang, anything. I know you guys had said you're attending with Isobel, but anything that you might have noted from your side, any aha moment, as Alan mentioned when you were listening in. Maybe we hear from Lelona first.
Hi, sorry, I was speaking for and I was on mute. Thank you so much, colleagues, for the presentations, Isobel and Skhumbuzo, the contributions as well. For me, it's mainly just, a comment to say that, look, these are conversations that have been happening for quite some time, and now I think is the best time. I mean, there's no better time to actually see the implementation, taken from these conversations to policies, to implementations. And I think there was another comment, I think it was in the chat, saying that, look, these conversations are always happening, but the marginalized are not really, involved. They are the ones that feel the effect of the implementation, but they're not really impacted when it comes to the conversations and to the planning. And so I think, a shift maybe in audience could benefit even the implementation stages of such important conversations as well. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents about it. But I mean, it was a great layout. It was a great plan from the UBI to the basic income grant and its implementation here in South Africa. I think, it's a very important conversation to be had. And thank you so much again.
Thanks for that, Lalona. Khomotsang, any closing thoughts, comments from your end?
Okay, so the presentations were really good, and my closing comment would be what Lelana just said. It is about time that we implement, because conversations have been going on and on, so implementation would be great. And to also feed on to what Njabulo had highlighted, we really do need to involve the youth, because the youth are the ones that are greatly impacted, as unemployment is very high and it hits too much on them. So the involvement of youth, and it is time that we actually implement all these talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Busisiwe, or Mfundisi Busisiwe, I know you had raised your hand. This would be your time to give a question or your closing remarks. We seem to have lost her there, or maybe she's struggling. So Alan, I think I'll send it back to you, because I think everyone else has, or maybe Danita. Danita, I think the last we heard of you was
Hello?
at the. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So Busisiwe has managed to connect. So Busisiwe, and then we can go to Danita.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I was saying thank you very much for presentation and input and discussion that we have, and also I agree with my colleagues to say the implementation is very important, because we had policy and we discuss, but there's no implementation. And on my side, I think that this can help, but there must be a monitoring and evaluation of these funds and the system that we have at the moment, because you can see it's easily to have corruption that is taking place at the moment. We see with this COVID-19, the corruption that's happening. But that's my few ways that I can say, but this was a very, very, very much discussion that has been, I have heard the presentation and input that the colleagues are talking about, and thank you very much. I think maybe next time when we talk, we'll be talking about the implementation, to say where do we go, how do we implement all these funds, because on my side really it did help, because I'm getting the grants where when there was this COVID-19, all my children were not working. I was the one who have to support. So that 250 that they add on top of that, it did help. So now what will happen after October, because it was just 6 months. So that's my concern that I have, but thank you very much.
Anita?
Okay, thank you everyone, Isobel and Skhumbuzo, for the discussions. I always learn something new about UBI and BIG when we have these webinars and discussions. One of the main things that resonated with me was when Isobel, talked about how, it's emphasized that we should vote. And, there's always this big emphasis that SA is a democratic nation and we can vote for Chai, but every year, well, every 4 year that we vote, or 5 years, I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, every time we vote, it's like nothing really happens, and in fact it gets worse. It has been alarmingly, and Isobel was saying, like, where is the party that's going to champion the rights of the marginalized? Back in 2013, the EFF, the creation of the EFF was kind of a glimmer of hope for the youth. I remembered I just started varsity, and a lot of young people, were interested in the EFF because they thought okay, now is the time that our issues and our cries are going to be at the forefront and we're going to be adequately represented. And it's sad to say that we're not seeing that much change, and it's been 2013 was 7 years ago. So I just hope that, you know, going forward, 2020 will actually, you know, will actually open the eyes of our leaders that people are seriously suffering and it's time to take our needs seriously. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, I suppose, Gunal, I don't think you had a chance to have a closing statement. Sorry, you're very faint.
Sorry, better now,
There
I
we
think.
go. Yeah.
Thank you, very interesting. To get just to maybe as a final comment for me as a Swedish citizen and coming from a country where I think trust in the state is among the highest in the world. It's of course extremely interesting to hear your discussion, but also a challenge, I think, or that I see the challenges in a new light. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Gunal. So, in summary, and this is probably a more difficult one to summarize than any of the others because we've not really concluded on anything. I think we've generated a lot more questions, which is in some ways a lot more useful for the kind of processes that we're setting up. So we had a fairly comprehensive laying out of what the basic income grant or universal basic income is from Isobel. And she spoke to some of the real challenges of how do we get this policy implemented, or some policy that reflects on the dire situation that the majority of South Africans are finding themselves in at the moment, where they have absolutely no income security. And I think a critical thing that one of the critical points that came out in that conversation is that this notion of dependency, which gets thrown about quite a lot whenever you have conversations and people accuse you of being a socialist. The line of attack for confronting that dependency line is to point out that while we all have dependencies, we have dependencies on income, and it's just the source of our income that varies. And in many, many places across the world, when people don't have income, the states generally step in and provide income security, whether it's the dole in the UK or JobKeeper in Australia, or one of a wide variety of mechanisms that exist all over the world. I think the important thing for us is within the framework of the universal basic income, is that we're saying everybody deserves that kind of security. And in countries where employment is low and where people have little option for support other than state support, the basic income grant almost becomes a mandatory part of what our social safety nets should contain. Skhumbuzo asked us a big question that in this round of conversation, who is actually leading this conversation? Who is bringing the UBI to the people? Are the people bringing the UBI to the state? Or is the state taken on this project? And if the state has taken on this project, should we not be treating it with quite a lot of suspicion? What's the catch? And I think that that's a very natural position for South Africans and many people living in developing countries to have, is when the state proposes, generally it will take away with the other hand. So a position of, I would say, suspicion, a naturally defensive position that we probably almost by default take up, whether the state has good intention or not. And there's a second tier of the power conversation there, in that who's leading this conversation? Is it something that is generated from community, or is it something that civil society has developed and is selling to community? Who holds the power in the debate? Is the power centered around the technical nature of the conversation? And how do we expand that conversation out so that it's its technicality doesn't exclude people. And an interesting dilemma that he points out is that the campaign space is quite demanding on communities, right? The words that he uses, that demands are coming from all sides. And to some extent, communities have little autonomy in deciding what they will or won't engage in. There are so many things that are relevant to their lives. And maybe there is a need for us to be thinking about how do we reduce this level of demand on communities so that they can act effectively in one or two spaces in order to create change. A big question to people working in formal civil society: is this about civil society wanting to maintain their power by being the voice of the voiceless? I think that that's a very, very important challenge, and one that has come through in many conversations that we've had in this series of hubs, is what is the role of civil society, formal civil society, in relation to community-based organizations, activists, and individuals who are trying to create change in their own spaces. If civil society maintains this representational space, do we ever get true transformation? Probably the theme of this entire series so far. Are we building the right platforms to allow engagement? Language, and when we're talking about language, we're talking both about vernacular, but we're also talking about the technical nature of the language. Are we delivering the messages in the mediums that people find useful? Mabore's statement, or Mabore's input, spoke to a very different mode of engagement. One that we sort of, in civil society, talk about a lot, but we never really implement at scale. The idea of art and drama and music as a way of engaging our constituencies and helping them build their understanding, not just for the purpose of changing their minds. Another important call from Skhumbuzo is the need for us to discipline ourselves and allow voices, marginal voices, to arrive in the room with their lack of knowledge and to share their experience so that they can grow and learn. We have to affirm people's right to be in the room. We have to affirm people's ability to take on information, interrogate it, and make decisions on the basis of that information. And maybe, to use a very harsh word, to deal with our own paternalism that is quite embedded in the sort of practice of the professional development worker. And I suppose the other big question, which may be an entire conversation on its own, is what is this constant tendency towards going to court doing to people's sense of confidence? That if the courts have to be the points at which we reinforce change, what are we saying about people's collective ability to actually force change through? And we're not talking here about courts ratifying things that communities are demanding generally. What we are is the courts leading the change process in the country, and probably a really, really big conversation around the role of mass-based action as opposed to civil litigation. The question of trust in the state I've spoken about. And I suppose embedded in that is a question of, should our action be more militant? Should the demands of communities be more forceful in the way the state is almost compelled to respond to people, rather than what we do now, which is more about convincing people? We have good examples of mobilization from Abahlali and other movements. Treatment action campaigns have been very, very successful. We have numbers of efforts to try to collect people's experiences and to create the kind of narrative that is necessary for us to at least give a human face to the change. But the big question is, how do we go from simple collecting of experiences, simple education and awareness, to mobilization? And I think that that's the unanswered question in this conversation that we've had. And we understand that it's a complex question to answer, but it's one that sits at the heart of the organizer's practice, is education and awareness sufficient to stimulate action to create change? And I don't think that there are universal answers, or universal strategies to those. They come out of quite an intense and personal engagement with the communities that we want to support, to mobilize independently. So there's a lot of work in that. And I think one of the challenges back to civil society in that space is that we are tending to look towards the one-size-fits-all quick fix situation, where if we put out one message next week, we're going to have 1 million people on the ground next month, when we know that the large marches of the 80s in response to the apartheid government were actually the culmination of nearly 80 or 90 years of work in a large number of movements across entire countries and continents, to culminate in the kind of mobilization that we saw in the anti-apartheid movement. And yet, when we do our work nowadays, we seem to think that we can create large masses of people in the space of 2 to 3 years without sufficient attention being paid to their needs, their wanting to understand, and their ability to engage with large and complex issues as individuals, rather than as people who receive information from others who know better. So I think that those are the big questions that emerge for me, and I hope you found them useful. As is practice in these, we normally allow Ashley a few minutes before we close the meeting. And once Ashley is done, I'll hand back to Tembela. Thank you.
Continue that practice, Ellen. It doesn't mean anything. But I think it's nice to have Isobel back in the fold. Isobel was at the beginning of Act Ubumbano as well. It seems like you've got quite a track record, Isobel, of being part of many initiatives. So it's nice to have you in the conversation again. Skhumbuzo, I think your contribution, as always, stretches our thinking quite a lot in terms of how we look at problems, and just not look at them from a superficial level. So thank you to everybody. I think that the more voices we have active in the different spaces that Act Ubumbano tries to create, the more, I think, depth we find in the reflections about our practice. So I suppose there's a number of names I haven't seen in our forums before. I would urge you and encourage you, this is a pure unbridled marketing pitch. Get people to look at what we try to do and the conversations we try to convene, to bring forward and to amplify the voice of those who stand in resistance against systems that exploit and oppress them. It's important work, and I think everybody in this room has got something very important to contribute to the discussion that we take forward. So once again, thank you very much, and I'm hoping it's not the last time we have this conversation.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks, Alan, for holding the space. And I think for me, I just have one last thought. I think from what Isobel has shared with us, it's very clear that we definitely need to have the basic income grant, and the debates that are taking place need to continue. But I think as well, from what Skhumbuzo was saying, it's very clear that that war on greed cannot be won if those that are directly affected by issues of poverty and social insecurity are excluded from those debates. And so I really think the struggle continues. I think before I dash off, we have asked Thabo today to share a poll for us. I'm inviting all of us to just take less than a minute and respond to that poll. But otherwise, thank you so much to both Isobel and Skhumbuzo and everyone who've participated in this Learning Hub today. So Thabo, can you share the poll?
I've just shared it. I hope everyone can see it.
Yes, it's showing. Can you just take a minute and respond to that? It's just 3 questions. As we are responding, Danita is reminding us that Skhumbuzo has got a birthday. So Alan, I will throw that back to you on how we go about singing.
It's okay. We can all unmute and sing for Mfundisi.
I'll allow you to start.
At my count. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday
to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Hip hip.
That's going to be a very interesting.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Glad to hear that the youth have been participating.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
That's how you do it.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
We'll
Thanks
send you virtual cakes.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.